Welcome to the first of three brief videos that I'm going to make describing my book, The Curiosity Drive, Our Need for Inquisitive Thinking. In the first video, I'll talk about human development and why curiosity is so important to that. Then I'll say something about the application of that to working with people with problems, troubled people, and how we might think about approaching that. And finally, I want to think about groups, organizations, and politics. But to start with human development, animal behavior is organized by drives. This is what Freud pointed out, and I believe it to be true. The way we experience our mental functions is that they create feelings. Psychologists and psychoanalysts might use the term affects. But you might challenge that. You might say that your experience of what goes on in your mind is that you have thoughts. And that's true. But one of the claims of the book, supported by psychoanalytic theory and theories from other psychologies, is that thoughts and thinking are a rather sophisticated mechanism that we develop precisely to manage our feelings. I just had a thought. I'm aware that I might be misleading you when I say that we experience our mental functions as affects or feelings, and that this is the evidence that something is going on in our minds. In fact, quite a lot of the time, those feelings are not conscious. We don't notice them at all. What we do notice is the ones that make us do something, which brings us back to drives. Feelings turn out to be the raw material that makes us function. Drives can be thought of as urges or wants or desires. They all have the same feature in that they produce the kind of feeling that makes us do things, that makes us have to do things, because it's a sort of uncomfortable feeling. It's not a feeling we want to stay with very long. Or if it is, it's such a wonderful urge that we want still to do something about it. And so drives organize us by giving us this sense of urgency and the need to do something about it. As we grow up, we develop other ways to manage our urges, one of which I've referred to as thinking, but there are other ways to manage these urges as well. Primary solution, the first one, the one that we all share with all other animals and mammals, is simply getting rid of the urgency of everything. We reduce ourselves to a steady state. Freud noticed this and called it the pleasure principle. He said that we are trying to reduce unpleasure. That's what he really meant by the pleasure principle. And all animals appear to be operating according to that principle. It works very well. I mean, my own dog will be asleep somewhere around here, on the bed perhaps, and works entirely on the pleasure principle. There's nothing that suggests that the pleasure principle isn't the best way of managing life, because it works so well for all the other animals. But we humans did something different. We've moved beyond the pleasure principle. Freud first noticed this, and then he said, at a certain point, the baby turns to face reality. But Freud's own description of the way that the mind functions doesn't actually, in my view, allow for that to happen. Well, at least not as a logical or reasonable outcome. And I'll explain, because in a way, this is the whole point of the book. What he had done was to collect the drives into two main forms. He called them the life instincts and the death instincts. Other people have called them the loving drives and the destructive drives. Freud suggested that all our mental and psychological ills were the result of the conflict between these two types of urge. The consequence of these two innate drives is to create an experience of living in a world divided sharply between total love and total destruction. In fact, Wilfred Bion preferred the term hate to Freud's death instinct, and I agree with that. Melanie Klein, who came between Freud and Bion, first described this world of the pleasure principle, in which there is such a stark division that makes life constantly dangerous, because if you aren't with the source of all love, you can only be in the world of hate. She called it the paranoid schizoid position, but I prefer fundamentalist state of mind. Either way, it's our original state, and we constantly collapse into it. In that state of mind, we don't face reality, because that would involve turning away from the loving source, turning away from pleasure, which is dangerous. So this setup of two drives in conflict and the urge to avoid pain cannot possibly account for the infant suddenly deciding to face reality. But what if we were born with a third drive, or a third collection of drives? Suppose that we were born with a collection of drives that you could call curiosity, and suppose that this functions by requiring us constantly, and I mean constantly, to explain to ourselves what is happening, what's going on here. Bion claimed that this indeed is the case. The urge to know, as he called curiosity, is an innate drive in human beings with the same status as the other two, love and hate. If that is built into us, then the baby, at a certain point when he's got sufficient confidence from the nourishment and love that he's been getting, he might well then be able to turn and look and see what is really happening. In my book, I describe how this takes place. I'm suggesting that curiosity operates in this way and makes us face reality. It is through this step that the conscious mind develops. Consciousness is entirely about the consequences both of facing reality and the continuing urge to explore reality. Two features that I think you'll agree very much define the human being. But we should note that it is in opposition to the pleasure principle. The pleasure principle is terribly attractive. Just enjoy yourself. Get rid of all that unpleasure. It's a really attractive idea. However, it results in a very simplistic world in which everything is split between pleasure and unpleasure, good and bad, right and wrong. And that's a very dangerous world, because it is a world in which if you are not with the pleasure, you're in the world of hate. And that's a horrible place to be. The human problem is that the fundamentalist world is very attractive because it's a world of certainty. There are no shades of grey or ambiguities, no mixed feelings. It's like Kubla Khan's pleasure dome, as long as you're inside the dome and not outside in the world of hate. And that's part of the reason that being able to face reality is a continual effort throughout life. We always have to work to be able to get into the position of looking at what really is there, because we turn away from pleasure, but also as we do it, we have to overcome the sense that it is somehow dangerous. There is another reason why reality is not comfortable. And this has to do with one of the consequences of facing reality and developing consciousness. Namely, what happens when memory becomes conscious. The consequence of being conscious of memory is that the curiosity drive will require us to understand what's going on here. And that, of course, results in the recognition that memories are a story, a continual story leading up to this moment, a bit like Snapchat. However, if there's a story leading up to this moment, It doesn't take a genius to work out that there must be a story leading away from this moment into the future. And what does the future hold? Well, if we look around us with the capacity to face reality, what do we find? We find that we will die. It's what I call the Alamo truth. Nobody gets out of here alive. So facing reality has the terrible consequence that we are confronted with aging, illness, and death. And those are very good reasons to run away and avoid this knowledge. No wonder denial is often described as the primary form of defense. Nevertheless, if we can tolerate the consequent anxieties, one of the things we'll find is that our species, being a social species, provides us with something wonderful, something that helps us face reality. Our human nature provides us with relationships. Right from the very beginning, when we're being fed and comforted, we're already discovering that we will always need help. We will always need somebody else. And that becomes a sustenance to help us to continue to look straight in the eye of reality. Weirdly, that means, if we can manage it, we'll begin to realize that the point about life is about relating, and that the relate concepts, the concepts connected to relating, we might call human values, caring for each other, looking after people who are weaker than ourselves, having concern, are the thing that makes for something special about being human. Those values become the sign, if you like, of a civilized society. It's an internal higher level of functioning. It takes an effort to achieve this perspective, and it takes an effort to maintain it. But in doing so, we discover that we have evolved within ourselves. Isn't it a truth that human beings who manifest values like this, demonstrating compassion, concern, interest, and love, always make you feel better inside yourself? Just a thought. That's it for the moment. Next time, I will be talking about therapy and working with troubled people. Thank you. Goodbye.